Hello, this is Michael, and this is step number 5 in the process of making a grading calculator using your Google Forms so that you can provide feedback to students. Thus far, we've done a variety of things. We've set up our master contact sheet. We've attached the master contact sheet to a form. We've created a form that we can use to grade somebody's paper. And then we've also, in the last video, created a VLOOKUP that lets us look up the name and the contact information for the students for whose student IDs we enter into our form when we grade papers. So the next thing we need to do is create a calculator to figure out what the person's grade is when we make entries that will show up in columns C through F. They'll show up on subsequent rows as we go ahead and make entries. We need to make a calculator that'll figure out if the person gets 6 out of 8 and then 6 out of 6 and then maybe 4 out of 4 and 2 out of 4, what will their grade be? So this is a fairly complicated process. I'm going to walk through it step by step so that you can see how to write the code, but there definitely are some thoughtful shortcuts that could possibly be used for this. What I tend to do is write this one time, and then as I make subsequent forms, I just copy and paste the code into the exact same column on subsequent forms or sheets, and that way I don't have to rewrite the code. But I want to walk you through this so that you see the logic behind how this works. So if you think to yourself, well, we could have done this a little bit easier or just typed information in as opposed to looking it up, the reason why I'm showing you this is so you can see the logic behind how this actually works. And that way, if you decide to make something a little bit more complicated, you'd have the capacity to do so. So in one of the earlier videos, I discussed what I call the things that I grade. I call them domains. Like I said, you can call them whatever you want. But for me, these are domains. So I have these domains right here. Well, I have 4 domains, and so the first thing I have to think about, if I'm grading a paper on a scale of 100 and there's 4 domains, each domain will have the value of 25. Now you might grade something that has 7 domains or 6 domains or whatever number of domains you want. I mean, you could really do an infinite number of domains. In this case, we have 4. So I'm going to make a couple columns here. The first column, right over here in L, I'm going to call this domains. And basically, I'm going to put the number of domains in that column. The next column is going to be the value, because I'm going to set the value for each domain. How much is each domain worth? And in our heads, we know they're going to be worth 25 points. But I'm going to show you the steps to do this because, like I said, sometimes you might want to have something a little bit more complex, and you'd want to be able to have this calculate the value as opposed to you doing some math and typing in real numbers. You can do that, but this way you'll understand how to do this on your own next time. So to determine how many domains we have, I'm going to do this. I'm going to count the domains. Well, the best way to count things like this is to do it this way. I'm going to go and follow this code. I'm going to type in L2 right here equals count if. It's a COUNTIF function. And COUNTIF basically is going to say count this if it meets a certain criteria. So a COUNTIF function works this way. First thing I'm going to do, so it's COUNTIF parentheses. First thing I'm going to put in the parentheses is where I'm going to be counting. So I'm going to just highlight this area here. I'm going to be counting this area right here. So I'm going to be COUNTIF C through F. That's the area that I'm going to look. And then I'm going to put a comma there. And then the next part of the formula after the comma is what I'm looking for. So in this case, I'm going to count if any number there is greater than 0. That'll mean that it's a domain that has some value in it. So to do that, after the comma, you put a quotation mark, and then a greater sign, 0, quotation mark. So basically I said count if within that range, C2 to F2, if anything's greater than 0, count it. So then I'm going to do a close parentheses and hit enter, and it's going to give me a 4, because there's 4 numbers that are greater than 0. Great. So next thing I'm going to do is assign the value to that. So the total value is 100. So I'm going to do equals 100 divided by this. Boom. And of course that's 25. And like I said, we knew this was going to be this case. But if you have something that's got 7, 8, 9, 13, 15, whatever number of domains, you'll know how to set the value so it calculates it correctly. So those are my number of domains and my value for my domains. Now I need to set up a little piece where I get the score for each domain. I just call them D1, D2, D3, and D4. These are my columns that will represent the scores that are achieved, a maximum in each domain of being 25, that when I grade papers that the person achieved. So here's how we do this. It's just basic math. So this domain is going to equal, it's got a maximum value of 25. So basically what I'm trying to figure out is this domain is going to be looking at the score for map shows all plates. So if the person got 8 out of 8, they'll get 25 points. If they get 6 out of 8, they'll get 6/8 of 25 points. If they get 4 out of 8, they'll get 12.5 points, which is half of 25 points. So to get that to calculate correctly, I'm going to do this little math formula. I'm going to say, in here, I'm going to say equals, and remember, I'm just setting this up. So equals this value over, and I'm going to click this value again, and there's a reason for that, and I'm going to put all this in parentheses. So I'm going to say, all right, this little fraction, which is the portion of C2 that the person got, the portion of 8 that the person scored, okay? And then I'm going to multiply that number, because it's going to be a fraction, and the maximum value will be 1. I'll multiply that number times the maximum possible value, which will be 25. So I'll do that, and I'll hit enter, and of course it's going to be 25, because we all know that C2 over C2, which is 8 over 8 equals 1, times 25 equals 1. Now, what I just did is I just set the score for this cell right here that I did. And this is, remember, this is the score that I set up to create the calculator. So what I need to do is set this formula so that it will look at the subsequent entries, which will populate down here, and measure them against the value in C2. And if you remember from the last video, what we need to do is make sure that everything that's calculating in this row looks at just the value in C2 to compare the new values to. So for example, the next person's grade, when I grade something, those values will populate in row 3. So if somebody gets a 6, I need to compare the 6 to the value in this cell right here in C2 and determine the proportion of the grade that they got, or the score that they got, and multiply that by 25. And the way I do that is the F4 function that was from the last video. So back onto D1, here I am, and the value that's going to always be consistent that I'm going to keep on 2 is the denominator value, the bottom one here. So I'm going to click right there. See, I clicked right between the C2, and I'm going to click F4. Okay, and then for this function, I want it to stay on 2. I don't really mind if it moves from column to column, and there's a reason for that. So I'm going to click it again, and I'm going to leave it like that. So it's basically going to say C2, and C2 can change, and it will as I go down these rows, but it's always going to look at C, and it's going to look at 2, which is actually over here, to make this comparison, okay? And then it's going to multiply that times M2. And what I'm going to do, M2 is never going to change, so I'm just going to put my little thing there and hit F4. So it's always going to multiply that by M2, which is 25, okay? So now I'm going to hit enter again, and so I've set this well. Now watch what happens here. I do this for a reason. When I am going kind of quickly, I want to now copy these formulas here, here, and here. And so I will go Control-C, and go over here, and Control-V, and then over here, and Control-V, and over here, and Control-V. So a couple things have changed. If I look at here, this is what I wrote, C2 over C2 times M2. So it's 8 over 8 times 25. So for column O here now, this is D2 over D2. Now notice the D's changed because I didn't have a dollar sign in front of them, but the 2 stays the same. Okay? Over here, again, E2 over E2. The 2's got the dollar sign, so the 2's never going to change, but the E's can change, and the M2 is the same. And then over here, it's the same as well. So I've got my calculator, so now I can just get the total score. So I'll just make this called total. Okay, and this is going to be equals the sum of everything in these domains. Okay, and that's going to be 100. Now you probably are thinking to yourself, gee, when I do these multiplications and these divisions, there may be some fractions and there may be some decimals. I generally don't like to give my kids any sort of a decimal that they might have to worry about, especially sometimes you get the decimals that never end, 0.33333, the repeating decimals. So what I do when I have this, the last thing I do before I make this the final way this is going to tabulate the score is I do a round function. And the way this works, a round basically lets you round a number to whatever number of digits past the decimal. So I clicked on here on the score, and I'm going to go over here to the formula bar, and right in front of the between the equal sign, oops, and the sum, I'm going to type in, the equals is already there, so I don't have to do anything with that, round, okay? And then I'm going to do a parentheses, okay? So I'm rounding this function here, and then I'm going to go to the very end, and I'm going to hit comma, and then I'm going to put a 0, because I'm going to say 0 decimal places, and then another parentheses, and then enter. So now it still says 100. But this way, no matter what number comes into here, it's going to round this function. It's going to round this number to 0 decimal places, so it won't have any decimal places at all. So now I've got my calculator set up, so as I grade papers, the grades are going to calculate. We only need to do a few more things. We need to set up copy down, and we need to set up formula. And that'll be in the very next video.